The lawsuit filed late Tuesday here at U.S. District Court in Norfolk is the newest attempt by the Norfolk noise abatement movement to have the runway extension project at Norfolk International Airport halted. The suit contends the $3.5 million FAA grant to extend the runways never should have been approved because federal law requires permits from the State Water Control Board and the Army Corps of Engineers before the FAA can grant the money. These permits have never been approved, and the deadline for getting the permits has now passed.
Without those permits, this grant would be for an illegal project.
The executive director of the Port and Industrial Authority, which runs the airport, Kenneth Scott, is a defendant in the suit, and Scott declined to comment on the action. But the airport was able to get the FAA grant for $3.5 million without the permits because someone convinced the governor's office to send a letter to the FAA promising that the permits would eventually be issued. Sachs contends there's no way the governor or anyone else for that matter can guarantee that will happen, and without the permits, the FAA cannot give Norfolk the money.
And so accordingly, it's our position legally that the $3.5 million grant made of taxpayers' money is an illegal grant and should not be allowed to be used.
Although Scott refused to comment directly on the suit, he did admit that if the U.S. District Court refuses to allow the city of Norfolk to get the $3.5 million grant, the runway project is all but dead. Mike Deason, Area 10 Eyewitness News, Norfolk.
A primary argument against the runway extension at Norfolk International is based on fears that increased jet exhaust would add a potent, if rare, carcinogen to the city reservoirs around the airport. Runway opponents claim unhealthy levels of cancer-causing benzoapyrene would result from jets flying lower over Lake Whitehurst and Lake Wright. But Norfolk City Manager Julian Hurst has released a letter from the Environmental Protection Agency, which says that the levels of the chemical projected to occur in the lakes are a minimal cause for concern. State Senator Joseph Fitzpatrick isn't convinced. Fitzpatrick had been the first to voice objections to the chemical at a November public hearing. He says the EPA has flip-flopped on its position without doing the necessary testing.
I don't see how you can make a conclusive statement until samples are taken and the laboratory tests are run. These tests have never been undertaken by the Environmental Protection Agency. State Water Control Board did take samples around October 20th, and the results of the sediment test have still not been determined as of today.
The runway cannot be built before approval by the State Water Control Board and the Army Corps of Engineers, both of which will base their permits on the findings of the EPA. Howard Jaffe, Area 10 Eyewitness News, Norfolk.